Hey guys, Jabber Gaming Jaws here. Welcome back to another episode. Today I wanted to do a gaming memories video regarding the system, the Nintendo 64. Now this system I didn't actually own at the time that it was relevant. I was a PlayStation fan. I went crazy trying to convince my parents to allow me to buy a PlayStation in the first place, and then I had to save up my own money, and then I finally was able to buy a PlayStation. When I first bought the PlayStation, it was about $130, and it was an incredible console. But at the exact same time that the PlayStation was relevant, the Nintendo 64 was kicking really hard. And for some reason, most of my friends had Nintendo 64s. I don't know what drew me to the PlayStation, but I didn't have a Nintendo 64. And for the most part, I was okay with that. But there were some things that the Nintendo 64 brought to the table that just could not be met with the PlayStation. I've always thought that it's a nice looking console. This is not the traditional console. They had a bunch of color variations kind of later in the life cycle of the Nintendo 64, and that's what I ended up with as one of those many color variations. So the generic one, the one that I played on, and most of you probably played on, was black and gray. This is see-through. It's kind of cool. This was really popular in the 90s to have like see-through consoles. They ended up doing this with the Game Boy Color and the Nintendo 64. And these were the first two systems that did that, was the Game Boy and the N64. So I want to cover this a little bit. One of the things that just completely blew my mind at the time, because it was the first console that I had known of that had done this, was to have 4 controller ports. Most systems at the time only had 2. There were maybe a couple ways that you could do it, but every console that had it was always janky. Like for the PlayStation, you would have to buy an adapter and you would put it in. I remember I bought an adapter one time at the pawn shop and it didn't even work, but with the Nintendo 64 it was just right there. It was just so ready to go. For multiplayer games, the Nintendo 64 could not be beat at the time. It was so awesome. I really liked the controller. The controller gets shit on a whole lot right now. Lots of people don't really like it. I really liked the joystick. I thought that was really cool. Basically, this is how you play the console. I have literally never used the D-pad on a Nintendo 64. Apparently, for some games, you're able to hold it like this. I have always only ever used the joystick that they have right here. But it always worked really well for the games that I would play. Now, there were a lot of really good games on the Nintendo 64 at the time. There was Zelda, Ocarina of Time, Zelda Majora's Mask, Mario 64. There were a lot of other games that I'm sure that I missed out on. But being an outsider at the time, the one game that just blew my mind was right here. This game completely blew me away. So I had 2 friends who lived a block away from me. They lived across the street from each other. Both of them had Nintendo 64s, and we would all get together and play 4-player 007 Goldeneye. And this just was the best multiplayer experience I had ever had. And as a PlayStation owner, I was playing a whole lot of 1-player games and having a good time. I was playing a lot of 2-player games and having a good time with those. But that 4-player experience, this game just, mind was blown. And I really wanted to have this experience, but I didn't have a Nintendo 64 and there was no way that I was going to get one. So I went crazy trying to find, I was 11 years old at the time, and I was thinking, oh my gosh, this has to be on the PlayStation. There's no way that this game is not on the PlayStation. I went to all these different stores throughout town looking for GoldenEye on the PlayStation, and every store would be like, I don't think that that's on the PlayStation. And I was just like, yeah, whatever, and I just kept on searching, and then finally, after going to about 4 different stores, the last store I went to was Toys R Us, and they told me, no, we don't have that. That game is not on the PlayStation. You can only play it on the Nintendo 64. And finally, the reality hit me that I was not going to be able to have that game. And that was tough. That was definitely tough. But eventually, so the year is 2019 right now. We just had the new year, and My wife actually bought me this Nintendo 64. It was sometime, I think, in 2015. And since then, I've had some really good experiences. Obviously, got to have Goldeneye, which is great. The other game that I had back in the day that was another 4-player, just absolute smash, an amazing game, was Super Smash Brothers. Now, man, we would go crazy playing Super Smash Brothers 4-player also. It was just absolute mayhem. The Nintendo 64 in the late 90s was the absolute best when it came to multiplayer. Couch playing, like sitting with your friends and playing together, the Nintendo 64 could not be beaten. And those two games are very much to credit for it. So since having my Nintendo 64, I have had some really good experiences. I feel like there's still a lot that the system has to offer that I haven't gotten to delve into, but I think that I've had some of the top tier. I think that it would be good for me to dive in a little bit deeper. But a couple of years ago, I finally picked up Zelda Majora's Mask. This game is amazing. It's so good. I go back and forth between which is my favorite Zelda game. It's so hard to decide. The top 3 contenders are Majora's Mask, A Link to the Past, and Breath of the Wild. All 3 of the games are just absolutely freaking insane. The first time that I ever played Majora's Mask was on the Nintendo 64, which I'm very grateful that I got to experience that. This was really cool. My brother got a big lot of Nintendo 64 games that one of his friends had left in a storage container, and this was one of them. And so I just randomly, he gave it to me because he knew I was into, retro gaming, and man, this game has been so amazing. I played it on here to completion, and then I got the remaster on the 3DS, and I played through that game. And man, this is such an amazing Zelda game. Like, I just freaking love it. But my favorite way to play it is definitely on the Nintendo 64. The next time that I play it, that will be the way that I do it. Another amazing game that I got to play was Conker's Bad Fur Day. So good. It's basically like, it looks like a kid's game, but it is not a kid's game. As you can see, the mature rating. This game is full of profanities and just like adult humor. It is awesome. Cannot beat it. Another one of my favorite games that I didn't even know I would ever like, because I'm not a fan of racing games, but I got into Hydro Thunder. I actually got the more rare color variant. Ironically, the blue version is a little more common and the gray one is harder to find, but I just love this game so much. I try to find every single version of the game that I can. It's just amazing. I don't even like racing games, and this game I have been so addicted to. It is so worth playing. And I have to say, too, actually, the Nintendo 64 has been my favorite version, because it's on the PlayStation, it's on the Dreamcast, I've played it at the arcade. My absolute favorite way to play it has been on the Nintendo 64. Go figure. I don't even understand that. Looking down for the future, games that I want to play, I have dabbled with Super Mario 64. I know it's like heresy that I've not even played through that game. I really need to. It's really on the list. And then another game that I would love to dive into is Star Fox 64. Again, like, I've turned it on, I've just like dabbled with it for a second. Haven't gotten very far, but it's definitely on the list. The Nintendo 64 at the time was just such a console that brought people together. That's what I think I loved about it the most. I was having such a good time with my PlayStation, but I was playing a lot of one-player games. I was playing Metal Gear Solid, I was playing Final Fantasy, but when it came to, like, let's all hang out and have some fun together, the Nintendo 64 just couldn't be beat. And it was kind of perfect that I had my one-player console at home, and then when I would go to my friends' houses, they all had Nintendo 64, so, life just works out. But I'm very thankful to have that console. I think there are a lot of experiences that I'm bound to have down the road that I'm really looking forward to. And I'm just so thankful that I get to now be an adult and just have all the consoles that I want. And the Nintendo 64 is right up there with it. All right, guys. Hope you enjoyed this. It's fun looking back at the different consoles that you experienced as a kid, even if you didn't happen to own them at the time. and it's really cool now later on to get to go back and have those experiences. So just wanted to share some of my memories and some of my thoughts about some of the games that I really like on the system. Let me know about your experiences with the Nintendo 64. I think that this system has a lot of nostalgia for people who are my age or slightly even younger. And I think that it's like just kind of it's kind of one of those systems. It's not the best system ever. There's a lot of systems that have a lot of more games and a lot better games, but there are just some games on that, and some people that experience those games at the exact right time, that it's kind of like one of those timeless masterpieces. Like Zelda Ocarina of Time, I actually played on the 3DS, and I want to buy that game and play it on the Nintendo 64. I mean, like, that's like one of the most timeless games out there. While everybody else was playing Ocarina of Time, I was playing Final Fantasy VII. It was kind of like at the time you were doing one or the other, because not very many of us were doing both. But I'm excited to get to play that eventually on the Nintendo 64 and going back to play Majora's Mask again, because just the Nintendo exclusives were few and far between, but geez, were they fucking just awesome. Top quality on every single system, and the Nintendo 64 is no exception. Alright guys, let me know what you remember about the Nintendo 64. Have a good one.